BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Cooper Friday. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. My guest on the program today will be Jude Morrow, and he's going to be talking to us all about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. Jude, are you with me?
I'm here and very, very grateful to be here too. Thank you, Ned.
Yes, not only is Jude Morrow the author of the book Dan Cooper, which talks a lot about the Cooper case with some creative ideas, mind you, but he is also a very experienced skydiver. Is that a fair thing to say, Jude?
Well, you know what? As far as skydiving's concerned, we'll get into this more as we go. I nearly feel like I've been doing it forever. I've only been doing it a couple of years now, and weather permitting, it's been on and off. But I mean, with skydiving, and a lot of people in the skydiving family will know this, that it's more kind of waiting around for the weather to change than actually flying through the weather with a parachute on your back. So I haven't an awful lot of experience in it just yet. I'm still in kind of rookie entry level kind of learning stage. But, you know, I can safely say if I were to leave like an airplane or a helicopter that I wouldn't die, which I suppose is, experienced enough to somebody who perhaps hasn't put one on their back at all.
All right, well, I do appreciate that. And if there are any guests that people want to have for Cooper Friday, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and share anything you want about DB Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I, of course, am your host, Black Box Ned, and I'll be talking to Jude Morrow. Now, Jude, every Friday I do this segment about DB Cooper, so I can provide the introduction to the DB Cooper story in my own words, but I have the opportunity to have you on the program. So would you like to introduce the story of Dan Cooper to us?
Absolutely. So we'll go to the reality, Dan Cooper, and it can be summed up in a couple of sentences. A nobody did a something and returned back into nothing. So with DB Cooper, this is what fascinated me about everything DB Cooper. Whenever I got into this, I was thinking he was this, young, suave, handsome, daredevil kind of guy that sat on an airplane, demanded $200,000 in a knapsack and 4 parachutes, sipped on bourbon and sevens, smoked his cigarettes, lit by a pretty blonde airline stewardess, and then in his cool, calm, and collected demeanor, exited over the Pacific Northwest in a rainstorm, in loafers and everything else, and simply escaped. But the more you dive into this, the more you learn that that wasn't really the case. I mean, to start off with Cooper himself, this was not a young man. This was not a man who was attractive to look at. I mean, the stewardesses had said that suspects were ruled out because they were too handsome or they were too good looking. And there's always the cool, calm, and collected image of DB Cooper, but he was quite worried. He was quite worried. He needed constant reassurance that nobody would do anything. He had Benzedrine on him, which he offered out as sort of like a calming effect or a stimulant. He drank, he chain smoked. He was just the epitome of panic a lot of the time. And whenever it comes to the jump itself, he jumped at night over a location he didn't know where he was, had no fixed landing area. And whenever he examined the parachutes, he took a smaller canopy whilst having a cotton drawstring money bag tied to himself in a drop bag configuration. And that's not good, Ned. That's not good. I've always wanted to buy into the narrative of Cooper being this cool, suave guy that landed on the ground like Mary Poppins, gathered his money, took the parachute, and simply just left to live on an island where he could sip his bourbon and sevens, smoke cigars, and have a lovely rest of his middle-aged and elderly life should he have made it that far. But I just find that scenario very, very unlikely. And from being in the vortex, I've nearly become like this WWE heel type figure that I just think this guy didn't walk out of the landing area. that night. I can't get away from that idea. I know people are so passionate about their suspects. I've never been a suspect guy. I don't like any of them. There's none of them where I would think, that's the guy or gal for Barb Dayton. Shout out to Barb. I've never thought that. I've never understood the mystique of Cooper. I think what the vortex is I don't know if everybody loves Cooper or loves closure. Where people we are a group of closure-starved people looking for an answer, and it's been a fun ride this last 3 years doing all things like DB Cooper, looking into it, writing about him, skydiving to try and get into the mindset of the guy, and it's just really been fun. Where it's a really fascinating story because it's so minimalist in its nature. You know, unknown guy does something, jumps into nowhere, and seemingly is nothing once more again. I think that fascinates me.
Well, that's very nicely put, Jude. But let's talk about some of these things here, though, because you've said some very almost negative things about D.B. Cooper, that he was not an extraordinary individual. But then what made you curious about the D.B. Cooper mystery years ago?
Because this guy is so unremarkable. Where this is DB Cooper. Whenever the passengers and crew were interviewed and asked about Cooper, there was almost a consensus. Whenever the agents had asked, well, what did he look like? And the consensus was, he looks like everybody. Mr. Everybody. He looks like everybody. And then whenever Tina Mucklow, the stewardess hostage who sat beside him for several hours, was asked, what did he sound like? Because Cooper had in-depth conversations with her, or not necessarily in-depth, but he said plenty in those couple of hours, even in chit-chatty small talk. You know, did he have an accent? No. So he looked like everybody and sounded like nobody. So what is it that captures the public's imagination? Like, you look at the sketches, which, by the way, are sketches. They are not photographs. They are cartoons. They are drawings. They are in the same family as Bart Simpson and Peter Griffin and everything else. They are drawings. And people are drawn to these drawings of this man that looks like everyone. And that's a really fascinating thing, where normally whenever people are documented or researched or have collections of fans, they have a very specific voice, whether they're singers, performers, Hollywood, anything, or they have a look. They have a specific look. But this guy had no look, no real voice, but has legions of, whether they're fans or curious people, all over the world. And it's a real gap in human nature where people are drawn to irresistible people, whether they have a slick, smooth voice or a beautiful, godlike look. But this guy had neither, but still has this loyal following. There have been books, I've written one of those, TV shows, documentaries for going on now 53 and a half years, where that's fascinating in and of itself, where this guy, whenever it comes to criminal characters, because, let's focus on criminal Cooper. This is a guy who potentially left his family, if he didn't abandon them already, to show someone else's family members a bomb or a false bomb, whatever, it doesn't matter. It was still an intimidation tactic to extort money and then leave. Where whenever you look at criminals and criminality, a lot of them have very colorful pasts, very harrowing stories, but this guy just is nothing. He is a big nobody. He's Mr. Nobody, as well as Mr. Everybody. And I think it's the psychological aspect of that, the mystique. Nobody really knows anything about him, and I don't think anybody ever will either. And that's the draw. That's what draws people to Cooper, where people are desperately trying to put a face on a voice on Mr. Everybody or Mr. Nobody, depending on which way you look at it.
And thank you for that, Jude. But you said something during your introductory statement, and that is that you are in the minority because you believe that Cooper did not walk away from the place where he landed. Does this mean you do not think that Cooper survived the jump?
Well, what I will say, and now that we're on BBOR, it's out into the public, I do not believe that Cooper didn't pull his parachute. I know that the FBI had led, or particularly Larry Carr, my fellow dead camper, that there is a possibility that Cooper didn't pull the parachute. I certainly think he did. I certainly think he pulled the parachute. But before we get to the pulling of the parachute, let's deep dive here. Let's get the flippers and the snorkel on, and let's dive in. So one thing I've learned about skydivers is that they're very, very particular about their gear. Where I mean so particular over their gear that if you fart too close to it, they will raise an eyebrow. Like, you can't even look at it the wrong way. You can't touch it. You can't go anywhere near it. And rightfully so, because, you know, people look at a parachute, you know, in terms of it being on other people's back. Like, whenever I have one on my back, that has to save my life. That has to get me on the ground so that my child can give me a hug once more. And they're very protective of their gear. So Cooper, in his middle age, demands 4 parachutes. He didn't bring his own. Where there were 2 skydivers who were copycat hijackers, who were airline parachute escaping extortionists. You've got Richard McCoy and Rob Heady, who brought their own parachutes. Now, ultimately, McCoy, I don't believe he used his own parachute. He used one that was provided. But he had no idea what he was being provided with. He had no idea. So the parachutes arrive, and there's packing cards in them. Now, I think he knew something about parachutes because he seemed to have looked at these packing cards. That was put in Tusaw's book. And the canopy he picked was a 24-foot canopy. And let's look at Cooper the man. And I am sorry to all the Ted Braden people, but all the witnesses seem to describe a taller man, around 6 feet-ish, you know, between 5'10" and 6'1" or 2. So Cooper was most likely a taller man for his time. At about, say, will not cry about 10 pounds either side. So let's say he's 180. And he's jerry-rigged a cotton drawstring money bag to himself. He's tied this to himself. He didn't once say, "Oh, this is a cotton drawstring money bag. Can someone please go into the terminal building and get me a knapsack that I had originally requested, please?" So that it could be A, clipped onto the parachute, or worn over the shoulders. And he didn't do that. So we've got a 180-pound man with a 20-pound money bag tied to himself with paracord and a drop bag configuration. Also, he only had 1 parachute. He asked for 4 parachutes, 2 backpacks, and 2 front-mounted chest reserves. So with the backpacks, the front-mounted chest reserves were useless and incompatible with the backpacks provided. They were a mispair, a mismatch. So he had 1 small parachute and no reserve, because right now, the way it is now in modern skydiving is that your primary parachute and your reserve parachute are inside the one container. In 1971, they were separate. And he only had 1 parachute and a drop bag configuration for the money bag. So let's say he exits the 727. Let's look at everything that can go wrong. Number 1, he doesn't know where he is. So, okay, he steps off, and the money bag, given Newtonian gravity, will, after a second or 2 of free fall, be over his head, or it could potentially violently smash him in the sternum. And if it misses his body and goes above his head and he pulls the ripcord, the money bag could be an obstruction to the main canopy inflating properly. But, okay, let's just say those things didn't happen and he pulls the parachute. This is a heavy guy under a small canopy. This is 24 feet is quite small. And I'm just under 6'5". If I were under a 20-foot canopy and I'm 200 pounds, I would have a very, very, very nasty fall at the bottom. And yeah, I know a lot of people say that, oh, he didn't necessarily jump into the wilderness. If that guy's landing on concrete or a road, he is getting very, very badly hurt. So he lands, okay? So he's on the ground now. And I think there is a reluctant, begrudging acceptance among the vortex that this guy did not land unharmed. So at this point, we're not dead or alive yet. But when he landed on the ground, this guy was hurt. You know, we're talking basic physics here. He couldn't have done a PLF, a parachute landing fall, if he didn't know where he was, didn't have enough space, and couldn't see where the horizon was to time the landing perfectly. So if he lands banged up, there's a couple of other negatives that can be in there. Let's say he lands on somebody's property and somebody says, we've got an injured crook, with an armed injured crook. If he jumps with a bomb, he definitely had a knife on him too. That's one scenario. Murder on the ground. That's one. Landing injured and then simply going into hiding to try and treat his injuries and then dying. Because where is the guy? But I know we'll get to Tina Barr. And it's not something that I've really talked about overly publicly, and I suppose trigger warning if appropriate. $6,000 was found in Tina Barr. I have no reason to believe that Cooper was only parted with the 6,000. I would be of the belief that Cooper lost all the money. I think he lost all of it. Where if 6 was separated from the rest, if all the money was found, fair enough, or none of it, fair enough. We can hypothesize either way, but I imagine he lost all the money. All of it's gone. So let's say he lands on the ground, whether slightly injured, a bit banged up, or very injured. He had one agenda that we can say for a fact, this guy wanted money. And if he landed on the ground without what he set out for, maybe he left on his own terms. That's another thing to consider. Yep, very dark, very macabre. But we're now in 2025, Ned. He had no one to tell because, I know there are people who've confessed to the crime, but none of them have been legitimately proven beyond all reasonable doubt to be Cooper. Or, if he died, nobody really missed him. Nobody was able to pick up, okay, loser Uncle Charlie seems to be gone forever. Where we're at 54 years later, nothing has turned up. Surely if someone knew, there would be a book deal or Hollywood. I would say we were in that bracket since 2016 anyway, since the case was administratively closed by the FBI. I just think the guy didn't make it out of the Lanton area that night and was just lost to history. That's where I'm at.
Oh my goodness, there are so many things we can discuss with that statement. And I'm going to offer you something, Jude, because which avenue would you like to explore? Number one, we could talk about Ted Braden. Number two, we could talk about the money bag. Number three, we could talk about Tina Barr. Which one would you like to do first?
The money bag. The Looney Tunes money bag. The cotton drawstring bag.
Because you gave out your scenario about how you think Cooper secured the money bag to his apparatus, for lack of a better term. But not everyone is in agreement with that. For starters, there's an individual out there named Dan Greider, perhaps you've heard of him, who believes that Cooper did nothing of the sort. He believes that Cooper tried to jump by holding the money manually, and he lost control of it and it flew away, and then Cooper would go on to attempt another skyjacking in 1972, because Dan Greider's suspect is, of course, Richard Floyd McCoy. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is Dan Greider, of course, did a tutorial. He made a video for his YouTube channel where he recreated the jump by holding the bag manually. And that wouldn't require the issue or the complication that you said about how the Cooper's going to go below the bag and then get hit in the face. And I know your response to this. I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you're going to say. But that is something that is just different than what you proposed. What do you think?
Well, I think Dan Greider's full of shit. We can edit that out if you like. That is completely wrong.
I knew what you were going to say. So that's all.
It flies completely in the face of the primary witness, where with Tina, whenever she was asked, the last time you saw him, what was he doing and what was happening? Where the last time she saw him, now, by the way, I am open to perhaps he did something else in the half an hour between Tina going into the cockpit and him exiting the aircraft. There was a 30-minute gap there. So maybe he did something else, who knows? But from the last credible observation of him from Tina, the money was in a drop bag configuration in a cotton drawstring money bag. The guy that actually packed this cotton drawstring money bag, big shout out to Bill Grinnell if he listens to it. I met him. I had lunch with him and his wife. He packed Cooper's money. He was at CooperCon 2023. I did a bit on stage there at that too, and he assured that it was in a cotton drawstring money bag that sat on his lap from the Seattle First National Bank, where he packed the money, and he took it into a Dodge Dart, sat in the middle seat between two FBI agents, drove it to the airport, and handed it over to the director of flight ops, who was a guy called Al Lee, who then gave the money to Tina to give to Cooper. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I know that I have to be fair and I have to be balanced as a guest, but I will leave it to all the lovely listeners of DB Cooper Friday to decide whose narrative they prefer, Dan Griders or Bill Grinnell, who packed the fucking money bag himself and handed it over.
All right, well, I guess that takes care of that. And as I said, I was pretty sure I knew what you were going to say. So then the next one, Tina Barr or Ted Braden?
Let's go for Ted Braden.
Now, you brought up some interesting challenges to Ted Braden as DB Cooper suspect. One of them is that you think that he was too short, and also talking about the parachutes. And actually, let's focus on the parachutes first, because Drew Beeson is the author of Paratrooper of Fortune, and he's been a guest on this program in the past. His DB Cooper suspect is Ted Braden. And one of the points that he makes in favor of Ted Braden's candidacy to beat Cooper is that there is a popular belief out there that DB Cooper would not have been able to steer or maneuver the parachute that he used for the jump, but Ted Braden actually would have been able to do that because he had been trained on how to steer a parachute like that, working with emergency rigs. Ted Braden was one of the most accomplished skydivers in the world, even represented the United States at international skydiving competitions, and he would have had a lot more know-how than the average person. We're talking about some guy who was ex-special ops as well as an ex-mercenary. This guy was one of the best of his time, maybe even of our time too. So how does that line up to everything that you said about Cooper and the parachutes?
I don't disagree with anything that Drew Beeson says. And by the way, I want to take the opportunity to thank Drew for bringing Ted Braden into this arena, because he is a hell of a lot more interesting than what DB Cooper will turn out to be. Ted Braden is a fascinating individual with a fascinating story. And if anybody deserves a Netflix series or an Amazon series in their own right, it is Drew Beeson showcasing Ted B. Braden. Ted Braden is an amazing story from a World War II hero at the age of what, like 14 or something, or 15? He lied about his age. It's a crazy. And he was served right the way up to Vietnam. And for me, Cooper was very amateurish. And you said that, and we all know with Ted B. Braden, he was a member of the Golden Arrows, which is I believe the Air Force or the U.S. military's skydiving display and competition team. And I think that with Ted Braden, he is just too experienced. That's one side of it. But even the steering of the parachutes, that's one thing. But I mean, it's a small canopy. Like, Ted Braden doesn't need to be DB Cooper. He doesn't need to be. He's already cool as hell in his own right. But with height, it is a big, big issue. Because with Cooper's height, from everybody who saw him, now I know that we're talking about like sitting down or standing up, but plenty of people saw him standing up, and his height would have been easy enough to determine because he was witnessed in a very fixed height room, which was a flying room, which was a Boeing 727. Like, I would love if Cooper was Braden. I would love it. I can't see it. I find myself sometimes wanting to get on board with the likes of Ted B. Braden or Skip Hall or other people being DB Cooper, but I just can't see it. Where Ted Braden's height, and a couple of things I've seen, has been anything between 5'6" and 5'8", and with Cooper, he was generally described as a taller man. And I think that's very, very telling. It's very telling. And in time, I know there's a lot of people that genuinely believe that Ted B. Braden could have pulled off this crime. He absolutely could have pulled off this crime. He had all the skills to pull this off. I just don't think that he did. And I love reading all the research into the life and times of Ted B. Braden. I love what the collective of the Braden camp are coming up with in terms, because I'm fascinated by this guy, but I'm not fascinated by the guy as DB Cooper. I'm fascinated above Ted Braden as Ted Braden. And I've said this many times privately and now publicly. As far as DB Cooper books or anything to do with DB Cooper, my favorite one, hands down, is Paratrooper of Fortune, which is Drew Beeson's book. And I know, I'm going to talk about my own book, but yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, with Paratrooper of Fortune, it's phenomenal. Like, go read it like yesterday. It's an amazing story. I just don't think the guy's Cooper. I can't see it. And then again, I don't think that is solely about Ted Braden. I don't have a suspect. I genuinely believe my stance is that Cooper was someone who was never investigated, who's never turned up on the files, who was a loser Uncle Charlie or a bum that abandoned his family, that decided in the throes of his middle age and maybe realizing there's not enough time left, that he needed money and needed money very quickly. I just don't think with Braden that fits that, or anybody that's been discussed or connected with being the hijacker of Northwest 305. That's where I am with Ted. Love Ted, just not as Cooper.
So one more challenge. Even if you get on the DB Cooper Wikipedia page and you're looking at the suspects list that they have provided, they will talk about Ted Braden and the height issue. And how do you think this fits into your analysis when the Wikipedia page even states that Ted Braden may have had his height measurements done in stocking feet with no shoes? And if Cooper were wearing boots or even a thick-soled shoe, that would have added 1 and 1.5, maybe even 2 inches to his height, so he would have appeared significantly taller. Would that do it for you?
Absolutely not. I mean, are you literally asking me to compare live on air actual witness testimony from people who stood either eye to eye with him or beside him on their immediate 302s and witness descriptions from literally disembarking from the aircraft or from Wikipedia? Because on Wikipedia, I could literally have added on there that I'm Ireland's richest citizen. And it could go unchecked for a certain amount of time.
Fast, about like 30 minutes or something, it would be gone. But, you know, that is just...
I'd screenshot.
Oh, you are Irish? You are Ireland's richest citizen? I didn't know. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to join Black Box Online Radio. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I'm actually here from my my bulletproof solid gold compound on Mars. It's on Wikipedia. Go look it up. And at the time of broadcast, it may have been taken off. But hey, we all know that there's deep state secrets and stuff like that and conspiracies that want to kind of hide my true identity from anybody outside from knowing it. So I'm telling you now, that's the truth, and that's it.
Elon Musk is shivering cold right now. Yikes.
Oh yeah. I must actually text him and tell him.
On some serious notes now. Okay, so you've provided some challenges to Ted B. Braden, and yes, you're saying that there's more credible evidence that's talking about the height. So that's going to bring us to Tina Barr. And why don't I just first get your solid introduction as to what happened with the money at Tina Barr, because you did tell us about the $6,000 that appeared there. Cooper's asked for the $200,000 on the plane, and in 1980, $6,000 from the Cooper heist appears at Tina Barr. How did it get there?
I think the money entered the Columbia somehow and washed up there. I do not believe it was buried by hand. I think we need to go with the easiest option. And I think a lot of people are coming up with human burial and human intervention theories to, I suppose, suit their bias that they want Cooper to have lived. People want Cooper to have lived. People want to think of Cooper being this Walter White, middle-aged crisis guy who stuck it to the man, and the man being Northwest Orient Insurance Company and getting away with the cash. Where I believe that some or all of the money entered the river that night, and eventually some of it washed up there. It really is that simple. I think it arrived there through natural means, and it doesn't matter how many hydrologists or how many people that know the Columbia or fished there once or twice whenever they were a kid. We know roughly where Cooper exited and roughly where he landed, which is quite a distance from Tina Barr. And it's just the easiest thing that the money arrived there by natural means and went undiscovered and undetected until Brian Ingram and his family had a camping trip there, and whilst building a campfire, 8-year-old Brian Ingram found it. Shout out to Brian. Hi, Brian. We would text and comment back here and there sometimes, but that's where we are. And I think one of the misinterpreted things about the Tina Bar money is all the stuff about the diatoms, where I appreciate and love Tom Kay's research and dedication in putting out the facts of his observations from the actual money sample of Mark Meltzer's note that he published, and it was published in, I think it was Nature magazine, or the Nature, it was a peer-reviewed journal, and it documented there were spring diatoms observed on the money. But that does not mean that winter diatoms were never on the money. That's the thing. That's the problem. And I think people thought that whenever spring diatoms were observed on the money and the hijacking occurred on November the 24th of 1971, that, oh, the money didn't enter the Columbia that night. We don't know that. It makes no sense, from that kind of way. But this is the thing, and this is why it's a swirling vortex and has been for 54 years, is that absolutely everything is open to interpretation. Like, I listen to this show, like, I'm a fanboy. We discussed this beforehand, like Cooper Friday, that normally drops maybe around 2 or 3 Eastern, and it's like 7, 8 my time, and that's Friday night, and that's whenever I sit and listen to Ned and Ned's guest talking about DB Cooper. And people so passionately believe that the guy lived and will come up with the most elaborate burial stories or the most elaborate escape stories. But we have to take it for what it is. Things that normally wash up on beaches or things that wash up on riverbeds or lakes tend to have either been fallen or been thrown in there and then came back over time themselves. That's my take on Tina Bar.
All right, then. I would like to walk you through my own genuine thought process about the Tina Bar money. And I would like you to tell me where I went wrong over the years. Because we're even going to go back well before Black Box Online Radio was ever a YouTube channel, well before Cooper Friday, and well before I was ever even looking into the DB Cooper story officially. And when I was just somebody who happened to find a YouTube video here and there about DB Cooper, and I would be listening to the story. And I remember this very vividly. They would get to the point about Tina Bar, and they would say 5,800, even though we can say 6,000 now. They would say $5,800 was found in 1980, and it was located in a way that should have been, I guess we would say it's upstream from Cooper's expected drop zone and flight path. Therefore, the money should not have been able to float there by natural means. So the only explanation could be that it was planted by human intervention, by human hands. And I was sitting there watching these YouTube videos, being like 22, 23 years old, and I was just thinking, whoa, hold on a second there. What makes people think that it was planted by human hands or that somebody had to have done that? My immediate first response was that that's just inserting imaginary person X into the story to try and make it work. Well, how do you know that imaginary person X even exists? I mean, could there not be some other explanation about how and why the money got there by a different means? You said natural means. We could even say some other things, like when I had Brandon Arnold on here, he talked about the cargo ships in the Columbia moving the money around, something like that. That wouldn't be purely natural. But over the years, and once I was in the vortex, I began to look at more and more possibilities, and I just got closer and closer to this expectation that, yes, the money was indeed manually planted. I mean, if it's upstream from where Cooper's flight path should have been, and if anything, I think Cooper may have been closer to the Lewis River than the Columbia River when he was jumping. And what exactly did I get wrong with my thought process?
Well, I'll tell you what, I will rescind one thing that I said, is that I will, I suppose, downgrade to, I don't believe that someone buried that money there manually. I do not believe, because I don't know if you've actually been to the Tina Bar site, where I have. Sorry?
I have not.
I have. I went there with Eric Eulis, and guess what? With your last guest, Brandon Arnold. Let me tell you a funny story.
You said you guys swam around there together, right?
Yeah, so I was getting ready to take a picture, and Brandon Arnold stripped down to his underwear so he could plant his face on where DB Cooper's money was found, which is now underwater in Tina Bar. So for Tina Bar, access wasn't generally open to the public because you have to go through the Fazio Brothers sand and gravel HQ to actually get there. It's on private property. When people say it was found on a beach, we're not talking like Miami where you can just walk down and just walk onto the beach and nobody will know if you were there or not. The likelihood of being seen when you're going down the river road into the Fazio property, I mean, if you are one of America's most wanted criminals, an unapprehended skyjacker, why the hell would you return to the scene of the crime, get yourself rugby tackled, shot, or arrested for going through private property to bury money? Why would you do that? But I know that Brandon Arnold is pretty similar to me in that he's like another WWE type heel character in the Vortex. But I think there's a lot of merit in what he's saying, is that maybe something unnatural affected the natural flow of the money ending up at Tina Bar. Whereas you also had floods on the Columbia River in 1972, which can indeed change the flow or direction or the carrying of objects within that body of water. So the Columbia has had several thaws. It was frozen over. It's had a couple of floods in there as well, where the river isn't just a constantly downward flowing thing all the time. There were interruptions to that, storms, whatever it may be. But whenever Cooper jumped, the money bag disintegrating or bursting in midair, and the money ending up in the Columbia. I mean, it's a possibility, but here's the thing with Tina Bar, though, Ned. Here's the thing. People are trying to apply logic to a deeply illogical man. And people love Occam's razor. I mean, people really, really love and drool over Occam's razor in this Vortex place. But
They do.
Between Cooper giving the name Dan Cooper and stepping off the back of the stairs, an anomaly happened somewhere. Something ridiculous happened somewhere where there's, and I think this is a human nature thing. Like people say, oh, well, all the copycats survived, so Cooper must have survived. And, in any case where ransom was lost or ransom was buried, it was found and it was all recovered. But here's the thing. We have an anomaly here, Ned. Something happened somewhere to either have all of the money enter the Columbia or those 3 packets enter the Columbia. But interestingly, $6,000, I know a lot say $5,800. It was $6,000 that was found. So on the flight, after Cooper had got the money and Tina had carried this pillowcase full of bricks, as it was described, to Cooper, I believe it was Tina that said, there's a lot of money in there, and he pulled out a few packets of money, wanting to give them away. The guy didn't have a $6,000 on the nose problem. So he had money out of the bag, right? We do not know for certain if he put it back in or he put it in his trench coat pocket. So let's say Cooper kept that money in his trench coat pocket, and then he decided to leave the earth of his own accord via the Columbia River. That could be that $3,000. It's a theory. It's not ridiculous. It's not bang on the money, excuse the pun. But there is an explanation for that money, that there are so many other, whether they're logical or sensible, I cannot say, because I am going to be afflicted by personal bias and my own personal belief system, like everyone else in here. But it's a decent enough guess. If Cooper decided to throw himself in the Columbia, having lost the rest of the money with $6,000 in his pocket, that could be the $6,000 that was found. Maybe that's it. Or maybe Cooper doesn't even know. If we go through the pearly gates or through the fiery gates, wherever he ended up, and we get to sit and have a drink with him, we'll probably discover 2 things. Number one, that he was an insufferable bore. And why did everybody worry so much about him or talk about him so much for 54 years? And the second thing being, he has no idea how that money ended up there.
Oh, you think that Cooper would have absolutely no idea how the money ended up there? That's something that, well, I guess I've never truly thought about that Cooper might not have any idea at all. But this is something that's very difficult to examine. And I say that because I've had Darren Schaefer on the program before. He is the host of the Cooper Vortex. And he made a statement that I would like you to respond to. And that is that he said, I wish they had never found that money at Tina Bar because it didn't provide any answers and it only led to more questions. Do you agree or disagree?
100% agree. I think that it is the mystery within a mystery. It's caused so much debate. I mean, it's not helpful. It's actually counterproductive. And I wonder, are there any other unsolved mysteries or cases where evidence finds actually are more harmful to the case than they are productive? Because the only thing we know for a fact about the money found on Tina Bar is that it is the money that was handed to the hijacker on Northwest 305 on the 24th of November of 1971. That's it. The serial numbers are there. They've been cross-referenced. That's the only thing we know. And everything else is just a guess. And we're kind of in a, with the vortex, you hear like evidence, research, sleuthing, and everything else. We're all guessing. That's what we're doing now. We're guessing. And what the Tina Bar find has done is add to all the guessery in this place. And yeah, I totally agree with Darren. I don't like Tina Bar. Well, I like Tina Bar, the place. It's quite nice, especially in the winter. It's lovely. I was there. But other than that, it has not progressed anything. It hasn't helped anything. And yeah, I wish it hadn't been found either. That's the honest truth. So I do agree with Darren there.
And hello, everyone. This will conclude part 1 of the interview that I did with Jude Morrow. I would like to thank him once again for appearing on Black Box Online Radio. And I would also like to thank all of you wonderful listeners for tuning in to Cooper Friday. And you can tune in next week to hear part 2 of the interview with Jude Morrow, author of Dan Cooper, and some other observations that he has made about the case, as well as about true crime investigations, skydiving, as well as the composition of his book, Dan Cooper. So there's a lot to look forward to. And one more time, you can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about DB Cooper. And that will be all for us now. Until next time.